Jeremy Hlavacek built programmatic publishing at the Weather Company, ran revenue at IBM Watson, and got elbow deep in the identity disaster at Experian. Now he consults, which is ad tech for finally ran out of bosses. He thinks the open web is dying, CTV is a mess, and his 10-year-old son told him the internet is for old people. Jeremy thinks the kid is the smartest person in the room. This is the ADOTAT Show.
This is Pesach Lattin, and this is the ADOTAT Show. Today we have Jeremy Hlavacek, who's been in the programmatic trenches since before most people could even spell programmatic. He built the Weather Company's programmatic business from scratch to the number 2 ranked publisher in the industry, and he grew it 500% in 3 years. So here's my question, my friend. How are you doing? And I mean, really, not the LinkedIn crushing it, because here's the thing. You've gone from building one of the first programmatic teams on the publisher's side at the Weather Channel to running revenue at IBM Watson Advertising to steering the commercial ship at Experian Marketing Services. And now you're in the wild as a consultant or advisor, basically the ad tech Ronin, the master samurai wandering the countryside, dispensing wisdom.
So I'm doing okay. I think I'm navigating the world. The world can be a confusing place at times. And look, I would say this, it's kind of like the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. I think that's probably true for the ad tech ecosystem as well. There are lots of companies having great success, other companies facing challenges, but it's hard to figure it out. It's hard to know who's winning and who's not. And to your point, if you just read LinkedIn all day, it'd be even harder to figure it out because that's not the real world.
So you've been consulting with publishers for the past, year and a half? Which means you've had a front row seat to the panic room. Can you give me the most illuminating example without naming names, if you need to, or a publisher that made you think, oh, so this is where the industry is really at?
Yeah, so I do work with publishers, but I also work with AI companies and data companies. A lot of my experience comes from the sell side of the industry. So that's where a lot of my energy goes. So look, I think for me, there's a really important trend that I'm noticing that I'm not sure if everyone's picked up on, but just this idea of the web or the open web or the internet. Many of us, my career has been, several decades long at this point, and I can remember all the enthusiasm about, the open web in the early 2000s as we created websites and linked them to each other and saw things like search and traffic improve. I'm not sure everyone's fully grasped how different the ecosystem is today when you think as a consumer of how people actually spend their time. Are people truly surfing the web, so to speak,
right,
sitting down and typing in www, etc. I think that behavior has really changed. And I think we all know it in the back of our minds, but I'm not sure we've really processed what that means for audiences, data, ads, traffic. It just has such an impact when you start to think of the world as more, you could use the term hedged gardens, but I like the idea of more like islands, little app islands, little content islands. They're not necessarily connected. They don't necessarily get along with each other. And, it's not the same world where everyone's blue linking back and forth to each other. I just think that's a big, big change that we're still processing.
You also said something I find absolutely fascinating, that most people in this industry see far more conspiracies and bizarre behavior than actually exists. And if you follow the money, everything is actually quite rational. That is such a contrarian position for ad tech where everyone thinks that someone else is steering their lunch. So here's my question. If the behavior is rational and the money flows are predictable, then why does the industry feel so chaotic to the people inside?
I think it depends where you look. Google just reported earnings yesterday, and like clockwork, they grew almost 20%. Company makes $400 billion a year. That seems to be working fairly well.
Right.
I'd say the same of a lot of other big platforms. But I think, if you're in more of the messy middle or different segments of the market, you're probably facing a lot of pressures, and it does feel a little bit chaotic. But I would tell you, I don't want to maybe repeat my previous comment, but again, if your business model is based on the idea that you're going to work with this world of websites that are sharing traffic back and forth, and search engines are going to drive audiences to your properties, that world is very messy and very chaotic. So if you're in that segment of the market, it is hard. I'm not saying not to do it, and I'm not saying there's not opportunity there, but if you're looking for a steady, regular, performance, and I would check out the earnings of the Mag 7. They seem to do it every quarter, no problem.
So let me throw a spicy multiple choice at you, Jeremy. If advertising ecosystem was a reality TV show, which one would it be? A, Survivor, alliances backstabbing and always someone getting voted off the island. B, The Great British Bake Off, everyone's polite on the surface, but secretly hoping your souffle collapses. Shark Tank, a bunch of people with money judging a bunch of people who need money. Or D, Hoarders, because we've collected so much data, we can't find the floor anymore.
Tough one. What was the first one again? I think I like the first one.
Survivor.
I think it's Survivor. And the reason I picked that is, listen, this is a competitive game, right? And the reason it's competitive is that if you're a marketer, if you're a CMO, you need to drive more performance every year in a relentless way. There's no breaks. There's no timeouts. There's no taking a day off. So that's competitive. That's hard. That's difficult. If you're a publisher or a media owner, you need to drive revenue every year in a relentless way. And you have to be up against your competitors, whether you're in the weather category or something else. And again, there's no days off, there's no timeout. So there is a very, very strong competitive DNA in the industry, and that can lead to some backstabbing behaviors, I guess. I've seen it before.
If last touch attribution worked, your waiter would get full credit for the meal. We make sure the chef gets credit too. Incremental.
One on this. I want you to imagine it's 2030, which is
That's not very far into the future. Should we imagine farther out?
I know. I've always said 2030. Like since the 90s, everyone said 2030. So I'm still going 2030. You're at some overpriced industry conference that still hasn't figured out how to make coffee, and you run into the version of yourself from 2016. Guy who was just starting to make weather company's programmatic business roar. 2016, Jeremy asks, 2030, Jeremy, so did we figure it out? Did the industry get its act together? What does future you say to past you? And be honest, because 2016
the first thing
of you...
challenge in that analogy is we got to cut back on some of the conference BS, right? So I don't know. Hopefully there's more meaningful conferences in 2030, but I'll take the point of, what would I say to my younger self? This shades a little bit into some of my beliefs, but I think, I love a lot of the theory of programmatic, right? That we're going to use markets and data to make better decisions, reward good quality publishers and inventory, deliver performance for advertisers using smart strategies and smart technology. So I love all the theory. I'm not sure we executed it as well as we could have, right? And I think I would ultimately point to, I think the programmatic industry was a little bit too Wild West for too many years. Didn't have enough standards. There's clearly been no regulation in the industry of any kind. And that's, listen, as a business person, you don't typically vote for regulation. Most business people like more free markets. But I would say, programmatic's kind of suffered without a lot of guardrails and rules. And it's sort of run itself into a place where I think the options are more limited because it didn't grow up with the right set of rules and guidelines.
So moving on, you've said something I think deserves to be tattooed on the forehead of every CMO in America. The industry
Have you ever seen a CMO with a tattoo on their forehead?
No, but it should be done.
Okay.
That industry is catastrophically, short-term focused. You made a brilliant analogy that convincing someone to buy a product is like having multiple conversations with a trusted friend over time. The idea that a handful of well-worked word impressions can close the deal, and I'm quoting you, is ludicrous. So here's my question. How did we get here? How did the entire industry collectively decide that the marketing equivalent of a first date should end in a marriage proposal?
Yeah, listen, like we said earlier, these businesses are competitive, right? And we're competitive people. We want to win. We wake up every day trying to do things better. I guess the thing I would suggest is CMOs should tattoo either on their forehead or on their arm or somewhere. Look at data in a time series, right? If we were to look at the performance of the stock market or a marketing campaign or anything, time is really important. If we include the last 5 years, we're going to include things like the COVID pandemic, right? Which wildly changed all sorts of things in the world, from interest rates to inflation to consumer behavior to e-commerce behavior. So I would just really love, if there's one thing I would love to change in the industry, I would love to see people take a longer, more thoughtful view when they analyze data. We're incredibly good at digging into something right away, first thing tomorrow morning. How many clicks did we get? How many units were sold? How much traffic was on the property? And that's all good. There's nothing wrong with that. But there has to be a moment where you step back and put it in context and try and think about the bigger picture. And that's where I personally see the industry falling flat. So hopefully we can do better on that.
So how does this work when the average CMO has a tenure of 12 to 24 months? Because more patience sounds great on a motivational poster, but what do you mean by that concretely?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. I'll be honest, I'm describing an ideal world. So, it might be hard to get there, but I think if you truly look at the most successful brands, the P&Gs, the Unilevers, General Motors, on and on and on, Nike, Apple, they just have a much longer planning cycle, and they really think about, how they're going to perform over years or even decades. And ultimately, the benefit of that is that their advantages compound, right? Like compound interest is the eighth wonder of Einstein, or somebody said that.
Right.
You can do that with your brand value, right? And by the way, like what's interesting about this is that many of the tech platforms that actually support this industry do think that way. Google is thinking many years ahead. Amazon famously, what's the Jeff Bezos quote? We planned this quarter 2 years ago, right? So I think long-term thinkers really do benefit, and some marketers do that, but many do not. And I think, I would just encourage all of those businesses and brands to try to be more long-term oriented. I think you ultimately get better results.
But isn't short-termism, isn't that a rational response to the incentive structure we just talked about?
Yeah. I think, for many CMOs, it depends what kind of job you're stepping into, right? If you're stepping into a turnaround situation, which often is the case, you're going to be measured on a short timeline, right? Maybe you're working with a private equity sponsor or someone like that who wants a 3-year outcome. In that case, it's harder to think long-term. I guess my advice in that moment, and I would pivot a little bit, is be decisive. So if you are going to step into that situation, you know what you're walking into, be clear about what you want to get to, and make that decision quickly, and understand if you're going in the right direction. So hopefully I'm not contradicting myself with that, but I guess the answer is it depends.
So imagine you're appointed the absolute dictator of advertising measurement, the measurement czar, if you will. You have a crown, scepter, a power to abolish one metric and replace it with something better. Nobody can argue with you because you're a czar, and that's how czars work. What metric do you kill and replace it with, and how long before the industry revolts and tries to kill you?
I'll pick an easy one on this one, but the click obviously is the much maligned click, obviously is I think well past its expiration date. And I think, we should welcome that, right? Do people even click on ads? Do clicks even matter? What do they lead to? So that's certainly one there that we can lose. And I do think, as I've done work in my consulting practice and in my own career, thinking about sales and looking at industries like, retail media networks, et cetera, where you're really starting with that kernel of truth about the purchase actually being made, and then building from there in terms of how you devise a strategy and all the different touch points. To me, that's a better way to go about it, right? Starting with the end in mind, and then building back through the consumer behavior to find the different ways that you can influence that. So as opposed to like, what did the consumer do? And then let's figure it out. Think about the outcome we want and then trace back to the consumer behavior.
So I want to backtrack, and I need you to sharpen something for me. When you said the web was past its prime, are you saying the open web is the advertising medium is dying? That websites and content distribution model are dying? Are the tile paradigm of build contact, attract eyeballs, and selling ads against eyeballs was always, in fact, a Ponzi scheme, and we only noticed it when AI revealed it?
Well, let me tell you where that insight came from. I have to give credit where credit is due. My 10-year-old son said to me the other day, Dad, the internet's for old people. So I think what he meant by that, I'm not sure if he meant that, but the way I interpreted that.
And he sees you as an old person, I assume?
No, he was making fun of me. That was his intention, was to tweak me a little bit. But I think he was actually getting something interesting. I would guess if you talk to anyone, and I have 2 kids, one who's 16 and one who's 10, not only do, they don't sit down and type in www.address.com. They don't do that for fun. The only time they do it is when they're forced to in school by their teachers. So it's a chore.
Yeah. One of the teachers said that he had to go to a website, and he was like, how do I do this? I was like,
yeah.
What do you mean? How do you go to a website?
Yeah. It's not fun. It's not interesting. It's not how they spend their time. So yeah. And by the way, I would argue that frankly, if you're under 35 or under 30, the web probably hasn't been that interesting to you in a while, right? Like you grew up in a world of apps and
it's
streaming.
Not that interesting to me anymore. I have like 2-3 websites I go to. I think it's CNN, Drudge Report, and I don't even go to my own website.
Fair enough. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have to like grapple with that concept. And when you actually step back and think about it, for me and my generation, the the internet was such an incredible invention. And this idea that you could even create a website and you'd sit around and go to www dot whatever you'd like. That was such a new concept, and it was really exciting, and it was, tremendous to do that. But there were also some things that were kind of weird about it. If you actually stop and think about it, told publishers and media companies who were, again, hyper competitive, that actually they're going to work together and they might share traffic back and forth. The New York Times might link to the Wall Street Journal. These are two companies that have spent decades competing with each other. And now there's this idea that they should all cooperate. I think that in some ways it felt a little strange probably at the time. And it kind of is a little strange. It's not the nature of media for deep competitors to sort of work together to grow this overall ecosystem. So I think there were just pieces of that when you ultimately look back, may have not made a lot of sense. And when you think about today's environment, if you think about TikTok or Reels or YouTube, there's absolutely no sharing or linking between those companies. I mean, if anything, they are trying to bring all of the content of the internet into your experience and keep you there. So there's no idea that you're going to direct your users out to some other partner or experience and some other company who's kind of a competitor, but maybe they're sort of a friend, is going to do the same for you. I mean, could we ever imagine a world where TikTok is sharing traffic with Instagram?
Right.
So I think we just have to really process what that means. And I would say this too, it's generational, right? A lot of executives who are my age, grew up in this open web era where the idea of like sharing and traffic and search and all these different flows made sense. I would argue that's not the case today, right? And we have to like really think differently about the market and the consumer behavior. And it's going to take a mindset shift, right? Because so many parts of the industry have been built around these concepts that they need to be candidly like torn down and redone.
So here's the part of this that keeps me up at night. And I suspect you also have the same issue since you went to the London School of Economics for Media Studies.
Yeah.
If the web-based ad-supported model is collapsing or at a minimum severely degrading, what will fund quality journalism?
It's a very hard question. And I'm glad you mentioned that because the reason I call that out sometimes is I actually think media is a very important industry for the world.
Right.
And if anything, it might be understudied. I wish more people actually thought about media and how it works and the incentives and all the things that go into it. And, when we talk about journalism, right? Journalism is the outcome of or not the outcome, it's a driver and an ingredient into the media economy. But look, I think people need good, accurate information to make the best decisions. And that's true in everything from a weather forecast to a business analyst report to your sports team, to your local news, to your national news, to your global news. So if we're going to a world where there's not clean, accurate information that's up to date and reliable, and maybe even created by AI, we're just not going to make good decisions, right? And I think that's already true, or certain people would argue that that's already true. And maybe that's true in the way some people view politics or the way some people are viewing a business, right? Like, can I really get the right information and data to make the best decision? If I can't, well, then I'm kind of doomed to fail. So, the answer is we need journalism. We need accurate information beyond just journalism. We need accurate data. We just need high quality information. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of parts of the ecosystem have grown up in a way where it's hard to do that in a profitable way. So in some sense, that's a little bit of the race to the bottom and kind of cheap click farm content issue.
So you spent years at Experian Marketing Services as the chief customer officer right when the identity landscape was going through its ugly puberty, third-party cookies getting depreciated, then undepreciated, and then recomplicated, whatever. Mobile identifiers getting restricted, privacy regulations, multiplying rate robots, and about 47 different identity solutions claiming all to be answer. Meanwhile, CTV is exploding, program is maturing, and the whole concept of who is this person and how can I show them an ad has never been more complicated and important. So from someone who's been elbow deep in data plumbing, what are we actually doing with identity in 2026? Not the conference stage version, the real version, the what is working behind the closed doors.
Yeah, I'll go a little wonky on this one, but I think ultimately there's a struggle between deterministic and probabilistic approaches. Oftentimes those two are pitted as opponents.
Right.
One's right, one's wrong. Ultimately, I think what's going on is if you're a marketer or a publisher or anyone in the ecosystem, you need a little lever or a dial, and you need to determine how much deterministic data do I have? Am I okay with that? How much probabilistic data do I have? Am I okay with that? And then what's the right mix for me as a business? There's no single right answer there. And I think that's what makes this space hard. I've run into people who say, oh, we only have 30% of our audience deterministically identified as a publisher. Was that good or bad? Wrong question. I don't know if it's good or bad, right? Really, it is what it is. And the question is, what is the right next step? Should you be modeling audiences probabilistically? Maybe. Should you be trying to grow your deterministic footprint? Maybe. So the challenge, I think, in the identity space is that everyone's searching for a right answer, but there is none. Believe it or not, there's an art to the data business, even though it's highly scientific.
So my question to you is, when you were at Experian, you were into something called single agnostic. I have two questions. First of all, can you explain that to me in plain English? And second of all, are you still a proponent of this idea?
Yeah, so I think the idea of being signal agnostic really speaks to the fragmentation in the data ecosystem. So, the thing that changed with identifiers is we had cookies. Cookies were imperfect in a lot of ways. I think if you talk to a technical person, they would tell you all the flaws in cookies and how they were never intended for identity use cases and targeting use cases, and how it's a bad piece of technology for that. That's fine. I will grant them that argument. I think if you talk to a business person, they would say that, one thing that was nice about cookies is they were free, they were universal, they were everywhere. And, it kind of was an open source tool for this ecosystem to grow up. So cookies actually fueled a lot of business growth because they were free and ubiquitous. But now we've moved way beyond that, right? So as the cookie has gone away and as the identity landscape has gotten more complicated, we have cookies, we have maids, we have hashed emails, we have, private identity companies, right, that actually sell you an identifier. We have identity graphs. So what's happened is that what once was a free, easy, simple system is now highly fragmented and full of different players. So to me, the best solution to that is, and I think Experian is a great product here and others do as well, is you do need a graph, right? You have to bring all those together and come to your own source of truth. The challenge in that, though, I will say, goes back to our previous conversation. You're still going to have to make a decision as a marketer or a publisher as what you believe the truth to be, because you're going to have conflicting signals from those different identity providers, and you're going to have to make the call and say which one has the best argument.
So can we talk a little bit about CTV? Because it's like the belle of the advertising ball right now. And every time I turn around, someone is launching a new ad-supported tier. From your experience for working the data and the identity side of this equation, can you give me an example of how targeting measurement in CTV actually works versus how people think it works? I suspect there's a little bit of a gap here.
I'll try my best. I think, listen, the promise of CTV is that you then have logged in, identified users consuming television style content, right? Much like the former linear model that we had.
Right.
You could bring all the targeting to that, right? You could bring all the things that, programmatic was sort of designed to do, target, measure, bring more performance to TV, right? That was ultimately the mission. I think what's happened and what, was true maybe from our previous conversation as well is, CTV is fragmented, right? There's too many CTV services, right? We know all the major networks have their services. All the tech platforms have their services. I think we all probably have more subscriptions than we want or need, right? So in some ways, there's a desire,
especially if you're in this industry, we all have.
If you're one of us, you've probably got a credit card bill that's way overcharging you for too many streaming services.
Yeah, it's about $160 a month I spend in streaming now, and I don't watch them. I just have them so I can go log on and look at the ads.
This weekend.
Yeah.
So I think that's become a problem, and in some ways, the old model of bundled, content through a cable provider. Again, lots of people can tell you all the things that were wrong with that, but it did solve some problems, right? It was easier for consumers. It actually made, in some ways, data easier, right? Because it was like, here's one source of truth for Jeremy. Here's his household identifier. That was simpler. So I do think in the CTV ecosystem, the one-to-one personal identity aspect is great, but the market is too fragmented right now and needs to kind of consolidate around a few partners, which, by the way, I think if you read the business trades, that's happening, right? There's a company called Warner Brothers out there, which is currently for sale. Warner Brothers is made up of Discovery and Turner and all sorts of other television companies that have consolidated. So that process is in progress. It's happening. We just need it to go a little bit faster, farther. And, not that I'm in the prediction business, but I think you will continue to see streaming television companies consolidate into fewer and fewer large companies.
So here's the thing I keep on coming back to. You said at the top of our conversation that you believe that ad tech, when used well, can help the world to have a healthy information ecosystem. But the identity and data layer
Are you going to hold me to that? Oh, no.
The identity and data layer is where so much of the privacy tension lives. The part where consumers feel surveilled, regulators get nervous, and the industry keeps trying to find the smallest loophole. So how do you reconcile this idealistic version of ad tech as a societal good with the reality that the data and identity layer often fills the most ethically fraught part of the entire system?
That's a hard one. I hate being asked my own questions. That's a tough challenge. I think, look, I would say that my entree into the ad tech ecosystem, you have to remember what came previously, right? So what came previously was completely, largely untargeted email, no personalization at all. Too old to remember that, there was like a couple of television networks that showed wildly irrelevant ads, websites, ran on ad networks, right? So I think you have to put it in the context of where we were previously and then give programmatic some credit for moving the ball down the field and say, yeah, actually, consumers do like personalized content, right? It's certainly better than what was there before. I think where we're at now is that in some ways, programmatic, given that it's now 15 plus years old, at least, probably due for a facelift, right? And some upgrades. One area that I think is probably missing is a lot more time spent around context. So, it's one thing to say, here's Jeremy, we've identified him. It's another thing to say that, hey, he's at home, on a Saturday night consuming entertainment content. Is that really the right time to show him, a new mutual fund stock pick ad, right? Or is that just out of context, right?
Right.
Time with his family. To me, I'm hopeful that, some of the next phases of programmatic is that we marry identity and personalization with the right context, because I think we all know as human beings that, or an ad taken out of context doesn't work, right? We know this from human relationships that, someone taking your comment out of context can be really insulting, right? Well, the same is true for advertising, right? Because that is another form of human communication. So thinking more about context and what's the right thing to say at the right time, I think could be really helpful for the industry.
So if you had to sum up the current state of advertising affairs, let's say as a weather forecast, which seems apropos considering your background at Weather Channel, what is the forecast?
Well, people who studied weather know that it's a highly local business, right? So New York is very different than Phoenix, which is very, very different from Seattle, which is different from Chicago. So I would say it depends where you sit in the industry would determine your forecast. But I would also say that, listen, I believe climate change is real. And I think, we're getting some more extreme weather at times. And I think that might be true in ad tech as well. I think we're going to see some things that seem a little bit extreme, whether it's companies merging and coming together, whether it's large platforms making maybe more revenue than we ever thought possible in advertising, or just different combinations and permutations in the industry that we didn't expect. I would say this, I think it's probably a good time to be an investment banker.
So let's imagine the worst possible thing has happened, not another Google algorithm update, something worse. You're stranded on a desert island, no programmatic auctions running, no clean routes to activate, no LinkedIn thought leaders posting hot texts that you have to pretend to care about. Just you, some coconuts, and the deafening silence of a world where nobody is asking you about first-party data. You told us you bring a great guitar player, a worthy basketball opponent, a great cook, and a comedian, which I have to say is the most well-balanced survival team I've ever heard. To be honest, most people bring their mom and a therapist. So walk me through this. I'm not joking. Why this crew? And more importantly, who are imagining those roles? Real people, dead or alive, fictional characters? I want names.
Man, you're going to make me be creative. This is hard. Listen, I have to say, I think the question teed that up is I wouldn't be surrounded by ad tech and data. So far, that sounds okay. I don't think I'm complaining.
That sounds like paradise to you.
Yeah, right. So I think, look.
Someone already brought the edge to their island as a note. I think a couple interviews back.
All right.
So you could strand him again. I'm sure he's going to.
I'm going to start with basketball because it is in season right now, and I do still play when I can and get out. So, I'm a New Yorker. I'm going to bring probably Jalen Brunson. I think he's got a very solid game. He's a point guard. He's a leader. He's a winner.
Is that the Knicks?
He's on the Knicks. Yeah.
Okay, because
So I like him. And in second place, if he's not available, I'm a fan of Nikola Jokic. He's the dad bod god. Got a little dad bod myself, so I appreciate someone who can play the game at a high level in that setup. All right, so that would be my basketball team. If we're going to, my guitar player, yeah, I could go for the edge. I'm thinking about what I listened to in the gym this morning. I think, I definitely had some hard rock in there. So I could do a little Metallica. I could do something like that. That would be good. But sometimes I also want to mellow out, and I'm on a desert island. So I might need, I don't know, who's a good acoustic player or something that's a little more calm. And
Eric Clapton?
Okay. Yeah, I'll go with that. I'll go with Clapton. That would work. What else do we need to go through?
Comedian and a cook.
Our comedian. Yeah. This is one of my vices, I will admit. I will get into a doom scrolling mode where I'm scrolling through videos on TikTok or Reels. And I've been getting a lot of comedians lately, and I actually like that. So my style of comedy is, I would take like a Jon Stewart, maybe a Conan O'Brien, possibly a Seinfeld, although he's a little bit of a different generation. But yeah, I'd throw any of those guys out there. I like a sharp wit. I like someone who's got good one-liners and, has a witty take.
Can any of these roles overlap? Like, is there a comedian who can cook? Because multitaskers are worth their weight in coconuts.
If they do, yeah. I mean, I don't know how much room there is on this island. So if someone can play two roles, I mean, I don't know. I'm good with that.
So the basketball opponent, this one fascinated me because you didn't say someone to play basketball with. You said someone who's a worthy opponent. That implies competition matters to you.
Yeah.
You don't want a friendly game of horse. You want someone who's going to trash talk you and make you learn every point. So give me an example. Who is the ideal worthy basketball opponent for Jeremy Hlavacek?
So good insight there. Yes, I like a little competition on the basketball court. I will talk a little trash, and I think that's part of the game. So I grew up, in my time, I was kind of probably the Jordan era, but also even going back a little farther, I was watching a documentary recently about, Larry Bird, right? Like just a legendary trash talk.
And they had the short shorts.
Yeah, he had the short shorts, but he would also...
That always amazed me. I watch him like, where's the rest of their pants?
But he would literally walk up to players and say, I'm going to hit a 3-pointer in the corner in your face on this next play. Try and stop me. And then he'd do it. So I admire that kind of confidence.
Is that how you did business?
I try to. I don't know if I'd call myself the Larry Bird of business, but I do my best.
So multiple choice question. Jeremy's day 30 on the island. You've got your crew of comedians killing guitar players, learned 3 new songs.
We didn't do the cook.
Shells.
Should we do the cook?
Oh, you didn't do the cook?
Yeah.
Who's the cook? Anthony Bourdain?
All right.
Everyone chooses Anthony Bourdain.
I thought about this. Actually, Anthony Bourdain is from my hometown, so I do like Anthony Bourdain.
What's your hometown?
You're going to have to research it and look it up. I can't share that. But I would say I'm also a New Yorker. I thought about this one. I think Danny Meyer would be my choice. Everything from Shake Shack to Gramercy Tavern covers the whole gamut. Legend. So that's my call.
So back to the question. You got your crew again. Your basketball rival just beat you 11-9 in a brutal game of 1-on-1. The rescue boat appears on the horizon. The boat is captained by someone offering the CEO role at the world's business ad tech company, with the caveat you can never return to the island. Do you swim to the boat as fast as you want? Wave on the boat that you found paradise and the island has better data quality. C, negotiate from the beach. You'll take the role, but only if you can bring the guitarist. D, ask the comedian to yell at the boat something inappropriate while you think about it.
Man, can I combine some answers? I think...
So you're from New Jersey.
Yeah, there you go. I knew you were looking that up.
Jersey. I was going to say, I actually guessed Connecticut, but...
Okay. Yeah, don't, you're not profiling me right now at all, I'm sure.
No.
I would say this. I would say...
I didn't look if it was Southern Jersey or Northern Jersey. I didn't
North Jersey all the way, baby. Here's what I would say. So a couple things. So yes, I would love to take on the challenge. I do like that. I am competitive. So I probably want my basketball player, right? I want someone to bring out the competitive side. But I also like making a joke here and there and keeping it light. So I probably want my comedian to join me on this trip. And, I'll live without the cook and the guitar player. So I'll take the ad tech job as long as I can bring a few comedians and a few A players, then I'm into it.
You could send the ad industry a message in a bottle from the island. What would it be?
You stopped me. I don't know. I gotta think about that one. What would my message?
That's okay.
Yeah.
We've been in this conversation talking about the industry, the ecosystem, the big trends, and you've been brilliant. I want to pivot to human being underneath it, all of it. You said the superpower you wish you had is being such a good listener that you can intuit about someone's going to say, like finish people's sentences. That's a fascinating aspiration because most people in ad tech would wish something more like predicting the future, infinite fundraising ability. You wish for a deep, almost telepathic listening. So tell me, where does it come from? What made Jeremy, a guy surrounded by data and technology his entire career, decide the most valuable skill isn't about processing information faster, but understanding people deeper?
Yeah, listen, that taps a little bit into my values and who I am. But I think, listen, one thing I like about the ad industry is there's a lot of very smart people. That's a good thing. But I also notice sometimes that there's a lot of very confident people, maybe even overconfident people. And that's okay. But the reason I say that is that I think we have to remember in advertising that we still really don't know what works. There's a lot of claims about, this being successful, that being successful. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot to learn and a lot to discover in advertising about how to make it better. So to me, the way to do that is to stay humble and try and listen to people as best you can. I sometimes hesitate when I meet people who present a little bit too much confidence and that the sense that they have it all figured out. Because I think if you approach the ad industry in that way, you're probably missing a lot of really good insights, right? Because this is hard. It's complex. It's changing. And still, after all these years, the decades and decades and decades that smart people have worked on advertising, we still don't really know, right? I think the Wanamaker quote of 50% of my advertising works, I'm just not sure, probably still applies today. So I'm a believer.
Yeah, I just used it today.
There you go. So I'm a believer is like, if that's the environment you're living in, you should be humble. You should ask questions. You should not assume that you have it all figured out. And you should try and learn as much as you can. And to me, the best way to do that is by listening to people.
So your favorite quote I have written down is marketing and advertising is a very stable industry, but the companies in it are very volatile. And you've actually lived through that. Menu got acquired by Grubhub, the weather company got acquired by IBM, and the programmatic landscape has been reshuffled multiple times. How is that insight, the industry is stable, but the players are volatile, affected the trajectory of your life and the choices that you've made? Does it make you more willing to take risks because you know the industry will always be there? Or does it make you more cautious because you believe that any company can disappear at any time?
It depends on the day. I think more in the former, right? So you have to remember that advertising is also about creativity, right? It's about coming up with new ideas, new ways to inspire people, new ways to draw attention to your content or draw attention to your ad or product. So you have to enjoy and appreciate creativity and innovation. At the same time, there's a downside to that, right? You're not going to get it right every time. You're going to fail, and you have to be okay with that. So to me, the way the reason I like that expression is it helps keep me sane in a world where I want to experiment, I want to try new things, I want to be creative, but I also have to remember that it's not going to work sometimes. And that's okay, right? Because, given the amount of change in the industry and how much things continue to evolve, there'll always be other opportunities, right? So it helps me sleep at night to say, I'm taking some risks, I'm trying new things, but if they don't work out, there'll be another opportunity because this industry is always hungry for a new idea. So just keep coming up with them. Keep being creative.
Okay, the last multiple choice of the day. When you look back at your career so far, Lego, CBS, Ogilvy, Menu, Weather Company, IBM, Experian, and now the independent consulting life, the Ronin of ad tech, as we called you. Which chapter are you most proud of? The Weather Company years building something from scratch and watching it become the number 2 programmatic publisher in the industry. The IBM Watson era taking a legacy tech brand and making its advertising business relevant. C, the Experian chapter wrestling with the biggest question, data identity. D, right now, the consulting phase because it's the first time you've truly been calling your old shots. Or E, a chapter I didn't mention because I clearly don't know your career as well as I think I do.
I don't know. I think all your jobs, it's like your children, right? You can't just pick one that you love more than the other.
Well, you can. You can.
Or maybe you can. I will say this. Maybe I would rank them. I wouldn't just pick one, but some of them definitely rank higher than others. Look, I think they all taught me different things at different times. When I think about some of the early startups I worked at, or working at an early agency trading desk like Varick Media. This was a tiny little company on the cutting edge of programmatic at the time. One of the first partners of the trade desk, working with MediaMath and AppNexus. That was such an exciting time with a lot of small companies and innovation. At the same time, working at someplace like IBM or Experian, these are huge public companies with incredibly smart people and well designed and honed processes. So there's a lot to learn there as well. I think each one of them has contributed in their own way. And, maybe consulting is the best, right? Because I get to bring elements of all those into me and what I'm doing. So I'm glad to have had all those experiences, including the ones I'm having now. And
so you have this beautiful idealistic thread running through what's awful, cynical industry. Here's a hypothetical. If you go back to the version of yourself who was starting the master's program at the London School of Economics, full of ideas about the media's role in society, and you could tell them one thing about what's ahead, what is one honest thing you tell them about the reality of trying to make that vision work inside the advertising industry?
I do think about that. Yeah. So I like I said, I've had a passion for media my whole life. My very, very, very first job, I was an intern at NBC many, many years ago. So I've always, just had a passion for this industry. And my mother worked in this industry. I've had a lot of folks who I know have worked in this industry. So, look, I like to think of the best parts of the industry where we're creating a great, information ecosystem that benefits the world. And I think at that time when I was a student, the internet was just getting started. That open web era that we talked about was really taking off. And at that time, the idea was, there are too many gatekeepers, right? All the information is controlled by big publishing companies that are, stodgy and old school and maybe not, allowing as many voices to be heard. You can decide who that is in your imagination. But the internet was going to open that up and we were going to be more democratic and have more people contribute to the conversation. Keep in mind, this was pre-social media. So this is 2000. Well, we did that, right? We created social networks, Facebook, Twitter, X, Instagram, you name it, MySpace, right? I'm old enough to remember all. So I think we went down that road. And I think in some ways, maybe we went a little too far, right? If I look back now, 20 plus years later, yes, there are more voices in the conversation. I think that's a good thing. But I don't know. I don't know if it's okay to have a totally unregulated world of lacking any rules and norms, right? I think we might have taken that for granted in the early days of the internet and social media, where we just said, yeah, anyone can speak up. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it if you're rude or insulting someone or behaving in a way that we don't consider appropriate, because we just assume that would never happen. And I think, or maybe you're lying or misleading someone. So, I think we're going to have to consider that in these next phases of how do we allow lots of people to contribute to conversations in a way that's democratic? But even democracies have rules, right? There's a constitution that we follow in the United States. So I think we need a little more of that in the media ecosystem, right? How do we have freedom, but also have the right rules and guidelines so that people aren't getting hurt or misled?
So before I let you go, what's the one idea that you want the person listening to this to take away? The one thought, the one idea, the one provocation that you want them to still be thinking about tomorrow over coffee?
Media is a great industry. It's important to the world. You can be, a successful business. You can have a fulfilling career. You can take on interesting challenges. You can meet incredibly smart people. You really can change the world. I've said things like, I think media is understudied. I also think it's underappreciated in terms of just what a important and influential industry it is for the world. And I say that because I think, as I said earlier, look, I'm competitive. We're all competitive. We're trying to win. You might be trying to make money and drive sales. You might be trying to drive performance as a CMO or whatever you're doing. But just remember, there's a mission to this as well. And it's a worthy mission and an important mission. And I think if you keep that at least in some part of your mind, one, you'll do a better job at your job. And then two, I think you'll be more fulfilled. I think you'll enjoy working in media more than you did before.
Now, the last part is where you make everyone dance.
Really?
That was Jeremy Hlavacek, the man who built programmatic publishing, survived IBM, wrestled identity strategy into submission at Experian, and whose current message to the entire industry is essentially, the open web had a good run. Your 10-year-old already knows it's over, and the money is flowing exactly where you think it's flowing, so stop pretending to be surprised. The Ronin has spoken. Huge thanks to our sponsors Troutman Amin LLP and Incremental.com, two companies that understand what it means to actually be accountable for outcomes, which, in an industry that credits itself for everything and owns nothing is a genuinely radical position. I'm Pesach Lattin. This is the ADOTAT Show. Stay bold, stay curious, and for the love of everything, stop calling it a cookieless future like it's still 2019.
Yeah, I can't get up. I'm stuck to my chair. I would do. I wish, but I've got very bad legs.